So late Friday night, authorities descended on a home less than 2 miles from the Nancy Guthrie home in Tucson, Arizona. 3 people are detained, we understand. They are being questioned in relation to the disappearance of Savannah Guthrie.
Before we begin, if you follow cases like this, where details matter and updates can change everything, stay with us and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Also, let us know where you're watching from. We keep covering this case because we understand how difficult it is when answers are still missing, and we want to keep you updated as everything continues to unfold. It has now been 69 days, and one question remains at the center of everything. What actually happened on February 1st? Not theories, not assumptions, but what can be confirmed, because when you look closely at that day, something stands out immediately. There is no complete, confirmed explanation of how Nancy disappeared. No clear starting point, no single moment that investigators have publicly pointed to and said, this is where everything changed. And that is not a small detail. That is the foundation of the entire case. In most situations like this, there is something that marks the beginning. A break-in, a witness, a sound, a clear sign that something was wrong. But here, that moment is not clearly defined. And one detail continues to raise questions. There is no widely confirmed sign of forced entry. That matters more than it may seem, because forced entry usually gives direction. It tells investigators that someone entered without permission. It provides a starting point. It narrows possibilities. But when that is not present, everything becomes less certain. Now the question changes. If there was no forced entry, then how did this begin? Was she already outside? Did she leave on her own before something happened? Or did someone have access in a way that did not raise concern? When each of these possibilities leads in a different direction, and without confirmation, none of them can be treated as fact. Now move to the timeline, because time is what should connect everything. When was Nancy last seen? When was the last confirmed contact? What happened between that moment and when she was reported missing? That window is critical, because that is where the shift happened, from normal to unknown. And right now, that part of the timeline is not fully clear in a confirmed way. There are gaps, moments that are not fully explained, and in investigations, gaps are never ignored. They are where the focus goes, because something happened during that time, something that has not yet been clearly outlined. Now think about how important that is. Without a clear timeline, every other detail becomes harder to understand. Every claim, every update, every possibility, all of it depends on that missing piece. Now consider communication, because communication often shows when something has changed. Did her phone stop suddenly? Did messages go unanswered? Was there a final interaction that stands out? Because when communication stops without explanation, that moment becomes important. It marks a shift, and that shift is where investigators look closely. Now return to the idea of no forced entry, because this detail continues to shape everything. If there are no clear signs that someone forced their way in, then investigators have to consider other possibilities. Access, familiarity, opportunity. Was the person known? Was there a reason for trust? Or did something happen outside before any sign could be left behind? These are not conclusions. They are questions, and they exist because of what is missing. Now think about movement. Was there any confirmed path that day? Any verified location after a certain point? Any witness who places her somewhere? Because movement builds a timeline. It connects moments. It creates direction. And right now, that direction is not fully visible. Now consider the behavior before that day. Was anything unusual? Any change in routine? Any message that did not fit? Because sometimes what happens before is just as important as what happens during. But again, without confirmed details, this remains an open question. Now step back and look at everything together. No confirmed forced entry, an incomplete timeline, unclear movement, and no fully explained starting point. All of these point to one thing. There is no confirmed narrative of what happened on February 1st. And that is why this case continues to raise questions. Because when something does not add up, people keep looking for answers. Now think about this from a different perspective. If you were trying to understand this case from the beginning, where would you start? The moment everything changed. Because without that, everything else feels disconnected. Now consider how that affects every new development, every note, every claim, every update. All of it depends on understanding that first moment. And without it, nothing fully settles. Now bring this back to a personal level. If you were part of the family, what would matter most? Clarity, not guesses, not possibilities, but something that can be confirmed. And that is what is still being worked toward. And now look at where things stand. Day 69. No confirmed explanation of how it began. No clear timeline that connects everything. And no single moment that explains what happened. That is the reality. And that is why this question still matters. What happened on February 1st? Because until that is answered, everything else remains open, still being examined, still being questioned, still waiting for clarity. As the timeline begins to take shape, even if incomplete, the focus naturally shifts to something more specific. Not just what is known, but what is missing between the known moments. Because in cases like this, the truth is often not in what is clearly seen, but in what has not yet been fully explained. Start again with the last confirmed moment, the last time Nancy was seen or heard from in a way that can be verified. That moment is critical because everything after that becomes uncertain and everything before that becomes context. So investigators place a lot of weight on that exact point. Who saw her? What time was it? What she was doing? Whether anything about that moment stood out. Because if something changed, even slightly, it could point to what happened next. Now consider what follows that moment. A period where there is no confirmed activity, no verified sightings, no clear movement that has been publicly established. That period is not empty. Something happened there. But right now, that sequence is not fully outlined in a confirmed way. And that is where the uncertainty grows. Now think about how investigators approach a gap like this. They begin by collecting everything around it: phone records, messages, any form of communication. Because even if there is no direct evidence of what happened, there may be signs of when something changed. Did her phone suddenly stop responding? Did messages go unanswered? Did activity drop off in a way that does not match normal behavior? Because a sudden stop is often more important than a gradual change. Now return to movement. If Nancy moved from one place to another, there should be some indication: a camera, a witness, a record. But when that movement is not clearly confirmed, it creates a break in the timeline. And that break becomes the focus. Now consider another possibility. The key moment did not involve movement across multiple locations. Whatever happened occurred within a space that has not been fully defined publicly. If that is the case, then the absence of movement becomes important, because it suggests the event may have happened closer to the last known point than expected. But again, this is not a conclusion. It is a possibility created by what is not confirmed. Now return to the detail that continues to stand out. No widely confirmed sign of forced entry. This detail continues to shape how investigators look at the situation. Because if there are no signs of forced entry, then access becomes a key question. How did someone get close without raising an alarm? Was there familiarity? Was there a reason for trust? Or did something happen outside before any sign could be left behind? Each of these directions requires a different kind of evidence, and until that evidence is confirmed, they remain possibilities. Now think about how small details become important in this stage. A door left unlocked. A routine that changed. A moment that seemed normal at the time. Because investigators are not just looking for obvious signs, they are looking for anything that does not match what is expected. Now consider the role of time again, because time connects everything. If the gap between the last confirmed moment and when she was reported missing is large, then there is more space for something to happen unnoticed. If that gap is small, then the number of possibilities becomes more limited. But without a fully confirmed timeline in the public view, that window remains unclear. And that uncertainty keeps the case open in interpretation. Now think about communication again, because communication leaves traces: calls, messages, even missed interactions. All of these can indicate when something changed. If communication stops suddenly, what that moment becomes important. If there were an unusual message, that would become important. And if there was no activity at all, that absence becomes its own detail. Now step back and look at everything again. A last known moment, a gap that is not fully explained, no confirmed forced entry, unclear movement, and limited confirmed detail about what happened in between. All of these create a situation where the beginning of the case is still not fully understood. And when the beginning is unclear, everything that follows becomes harder to interpret. Now consider how investigators handle this. They do not guess. They reconstruct. They take each piece of information and place it in order. They test each possibility against what can be confirmed, and slowly they begin to close the gaps. But until those gaps are closed, while the case remains in a position where questions are still stronger than answers. Now think about how this affects the public. People see updates. They hear new claims. But without a clear understanding of what happened at the start, those updates can feel disconnected because they do not have a foundation, and that foundation is what is still being built. Now return to the central question, what happened on February 1st? That question is not just about curiosity, it is about direction, because once that is understood, everything else becomes clearer. The timeline becomes stronger, the possibilities become narrower, and the case begins to move toward answers. But until then, everything remains open, still being examined, still being questioned, still waiting for clarity, and that is where the case continues to stand, right at the gap. When where something happened, but has not yet been fully explained. At this point, everything comes back to one place, the beginning, because no matter how many updates come in, no matter how many new claims appear, the entire case still depends on one thing, understanding what actually happened on February 1st. And right now, that understanding is still not complete in a confirmed way, because nothing is being done, but because the details that matter most are still being carefully examined. Now look at everything together. There is no widely confirmed sign of forced entry. No fully clear, publicly confirmed timeline connects every moment, and there is no single, confirmed explanation of how the situation began. That combination is what keeps this case open in a very specific way. Not open because there is no information, but open because the information does not yet form a complete picture. Now think about what that means. If there is no forced entry, then the situation may not have started in the way people usually expect. If the timeline is not fully clear, then the exact moment everything changed is still uncertain. And if that moment is uncertain, then everything that follows becomes harder to connect. That is why investigators continue to return to that day, because nothing else matters, but because everything else depends on it. Now consider how investigators move forward from here. They do not look for one big answer. They look for small confirmations, one detail at a time. They build the timeline slowly. They confirm each moment. They test each possibility. And over time, those small pieces begin to form a clearer picture. But until that picture is complete, the case remains in a position where questions are still stronger than answers. Now think about the gaps again, because those gaps are not empty. They are spaces where something happened that has not yet been fully explained. And investigators know that. That is why those gaps receive the most attention. Because once a gap is filled with confirmed information, the direction of the case can change. Now return to the detail that continues to stand out. No confirmed forced entry. This detail continues to shape how the situation is understood. Because if there are no signs that someone forced their way in, then access becomes a central question. How did someone get close? How did the situation begin without an immediate alarm? Or did it begin somewhere else entirely? These are not conclusions. They are the natural questions that come from what is not confirmed. Now think about how this affects everything else. Every new claim, every new message, every new theory, all of it must fit into the timeline. And if the timeline is not fully clear, then those claims remain uncertain, because they do not yet have a confirmed place to connect. Now consider the importance of confirmation. In a case like this, nothing becomes real until it can be proven. Not suggested, not assumed. Proven. That is the standard investigators work with. And that is why progress can sometimes appear slow, because accuracy matters more than speed. Now think about the difference between what is known and what is believed. People may form opinions. They may look at the gaps and try to fill them. But investigators cannot do that. They must rely on what can be confirmed. And until those confirmations are in place, the case remains where it is. Careful, measured, focused. Now return to the central question. What happened on February 1st? That question is still not fully answered in a confirmed way. There may be pieces, moments that are understood, but the full picture is not yet visible. And that is why this case continues to hold attention. Because when the beginning is unclear, everything else feels unfinished. Now think about how this affects the people closest to the case. They are not just waiting for updates, they are waiting for clarity, for something that explains how everything changed. And that is not a simple answer, because it must be built from evidence. Now consider how the investigation moves forward from here. It continues the same way. Detail by detail, moment by moment, closing gaps, confirming timelines, looking for anything that brings the beginning into focus. Because once that happens, everything else becomes clearer. Now bring everything together. Day 69. No confirmed forced entry. No fully clear timeline. No complete explanation of how the event began. Those are the facts as they stand publicly. And those facts lead to one conclusion. The most important part of this case is still missing. The beginning. And until that is understood, the case remains open. Still being examined. Still being built. Still moving forward. Now the question is in front of you. What do you think is missing from that day? And if you want to keep following how this unfolds and what new details may come out, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next update. Because in a case like this, the smallest detail can change everything. And right now, that detail is still out there.